So welcome to this evening with Claudio Naranjo. My name is Jorge Ferrer and I teach in the East-West Psychology program here at CIS. We have materials about our program, who is sponsoring this talk here in that table. And there's another table there with Claudio's books. And I just want to say a couple of words about our department. It's East-West Psychology. And it's a department that is concerned with global inquiry into the interface of psychology and spirituality. And this global inquiry concerns Eastern, Western, and indigenous traditions. And we look also for applications of this integration, professional applications. So I'm saying this not only to market our marvelous program, but also to, especially tonight, because Claudio is not only a pioneer, but also an elder of the mission of the East-West Psychology Department. He was one of the pioneers of the integration of psychology and spirituality in the West, starting in the 60s and 70s, bringing the Enneagram teachings, advocating for spirituality grounded in psychological integration. He was also one of the pioneers of the East-West encounter and also the South encounter. Has books on one of the first books in the entheogenic and empathogenic assisted psychotherapy, The Healing Journey, that was celebrated in the last MAPS conference. Was the 40th anniversary of the publication of this book, so he's a pioneer also in that kind of work. But also his SAT programs that he's doing one here in March, and there is information in the table. And I want to identify for you Mrs. Carina Bertolotto. Carina, can you raise? She's here, sitting here, as well as Cynthia Martin here. And they're both involved in the organization of the SAT program here in California. And this is the first time that Claudio offers this program in 40 years in California. I'm going to be there, and I hope to see many of your faces there too. And in terms of this kind of East-West integration, I just want to read very briefly, because I know you came here to hear Claudio, not me, but very briefly, like something that Jeffrey Kripal, a historian of religion, wrote about Claudio in his book on Esalen, because I found that the new generations of students here at CI sometimes they don't even know who Claudio was, and brings a lot of sadness to my heart because he was one of the pioneers and still one of the first, the best. So this is what he wrote. Claudio Naranjo became known for his creative synthesis of Asian meditation and Western psychotherapy. Alan Watts, of course, had written and talked about this a great deal, but it was Naranjo who perhaps did more than anyone to act on these remarkable resources and came up with models and exercises to realize them. I can go on and on about Claudio's achievements and his work. I can talk about his 20 books now published, his early teaching in Harvard University, his pivotal role in the Esalen Institute in the 70s, and also he's being offered a doctor honoris causa in education in a university in Italy a few years ago. We can go on and on and on and on. But the last thing I will say is something I learned this last week while having dinner with him and my friend Carina, and is that CIS owes him much more than I had ever thought, because the very name of California Institute of Integral Studies, it seems that was suggested by Claudio. Claudio was teaching at that time in the California Institute of Asian Studies as an adjunct faculty, and then it was in certain meetings that they were like reformulating the mission of the institute that he suggested the word integral. So I'm going to leave you with Claudio now, to whom we all owe so much, and thank you so much. Join me in welcoming Claudio.
Happy to be here after a long time. And when I was invited by Jorge, I thought it was pertinent that I reintroduce myself in the country that practically have become a kind of legend. I've heard it said that I have died also. The reason is that it has become my place for writing. And as I grow older, the more I feel that it's my unfinished books that I should be giving more attention to. I feel more irreplaceable in saying things I haven't yet said, but reflect a lifetime of experience. And since I am every year here for 2 months, or it used to be more 3 months. At the beginning, maybe it was 4 months, but it has been diminishing. The sense of having little time makes me isolate myself very much. I don't want even to see my friends, because it's the only way I can write a book per year, sometimes 2 books per year I've been producing lately. It's as if they were already written in my head, but it takes some time to put it on paper and to, it's like edit. If there are already, if the information is there, it has to be edited somehow. So my idea is to tell you what I'm doing and how I got to do what I'm doing. In other words, what the story of my work, the story of my thinking is in my books. But I have been careful not to put in my books much of of my experience with groups, because I want experiential things not to be degraded into intellectual information. So I make a secret. Few people make secret of anything nowadays. According to the Jewish tradition, in the days of the Messiah, the esoteric truth will be preached from the rooftops. And it seems we don't have rooftops, but we have many people saying things that were inaccessible even to Tibetans a short time ago. It was difficult to get Dzogchen teachings, for instance, in Tibet. You had to journey a lot and be acceptable to a teacher after lots of preliminaries. And here, everything is in the open. But I have been careful to discourage people who come to my experiential work to talk about it. Sometimes I have them sign agreements on certain things not to be made. I have tried to avoid what happened when I taught about what Oscar Ichazo called proto-analysis, but it was almost a virtual body of knowledge. He called himself, he was one of my teachers, and when people came to him as a Sufi, he corrected us and said, don't say I'm a Sufi, I'm a representative of the Western prophetic tradition. And we hadn't heard that expression. Now it's become more common through Henri Corbin. Corbin, he speaks of the Western prophetic tradition, the common stem of the Abrahamic traditions, the esoteric core of these 3 religions that became separate. So it was quite an experience to be with a representative and he explained his being as available as part of a mission. He had been sent as a seed individual to America. I never heard that expression before either, a seed individual. And I never asked him for a definition, but as time has elapsed, I have been understanding it more and more. It's as if he gave the outlines of something to which he scarcely provided the content. For instance, the Enneagram now is in the street. Now the Enneagram, everybody knows about the Enneagram. And I was privileged to learn about it more than anybody else. But when he met with the group that I formed and brought to Arica in the north of Chile, when I was there for 7 months with him, and we met every day with him, I remember there was only on 6 occasions that he talked about this matter. We had a very complex program involving movement, involving attention training, involving examination of one's life and so forth. And here was something that he gave maps. And these maps have been published by John Lilly in his, no, Charles Start. John Lilly, I think, wrote a chapter on the Enneagram. And you see maps of this is a sexual instinct, and in point 9 you have union, and point 1 you have vehemence, and so forth. And but nobody could make much of these maps. We learned through his telling us, as soon as we arrived there, our type. And the rest was giving us practices so we can understand ourselves better and understand the types through interaction with each other. I seem to have reaped more than that from people than from anything he said. He didn't describe, this is type 1, this is type 2. He didn't even call them numbers, he called them insulting words, which I changed to numbers. So I produced descriptions of these types and realized that that made it transmissible and everybody was talking about them. And though there was a contract, as I mentioned, not to, some people found it very tempting. In Brazil, a woman who was very successful with it, when I confronted her with her commitment that this was for her own use, she says, too much money is involved. I can't honor my commitment. I don't want to honor it. But in many cases, it's not money, but feeling important through transmitting something important that affects people significantly. So that experience had as an effect that not only did the Enneagram become well known, but people's motivation to want to learn from me became to be very professional and businesslike. People who, after I quit doing my program, I had already quit doing my program. I was working through representatives. But when I did a few workshops in California, I got people who were very interested in knowing whether they were, am I right, or is my teacher right, or is my teacher a better teacher than your teacher? A lot of controversy around perceptions and wanting to have the last bit out of the horse's mouth to sell in a growing Enneagram market. So I decided I don't want this spirit. It's not seekers I'm getting anymore. People wanting for secondary reasons. And I then shifted to the Latin American world and later the rest of Europe. And it's been an ever-expanding venture because like this year I was invited to Russia, for instance, and invited to Morocco. I've been in New Zealand, I've been in Australia. And each new place has some interest. And in India, in England, for instance, my groups were visited by people, many Easterners, many Indonesians, South Africans. So I'm grateful for the Enneagram movement that has made this very popular. And now people come to what I offer, which is not Enneagram courses, but a program that contains this perspective, that contains this applied as part of a multifaceted program. So I have concentrated since those days, before leaving Berkeley in the mid-70s, I think, beginning to travel. I've been careful about not injecting more stuff into what ends up being the market, and something that then becomes transformed in books that contain not exactly what I would prefer to as a content. I was not very impressed. I'm not impressed with the enormity of Enneagram literature, but I am taking too long in a preface to point one in my story. Point one in my story is that I had the good luck of becoming a seeker very early. It was the good luck of having missed school for a year. I was invited by my father to come with him to Mexico to fetch my mother, who had come to help a friend. A friend of my mother had attempted suicide when her daughter was drowned in a summer camp. And my mother, common friends, appealed to my mother, only you could prevent her to try to do it again. It's not just medicine she needs company of somebody who makes her feel better. And so my father was very generous with anything my mother wanted. My mother wanted to come to New York to be with her friend. He found a way for, it was very difficult with planes then, but she found a way to get into a plane. Then I went with my father in a cargo ship to pick her up. My father had many friends and many contacts in the navigation companies, and one of his gifts to me had always traveled, trips, and this was the first trip. And because I missed most of first year of high school, he asked an old schoolmate of his to come to our house, a summer house, to come and teach me what I needed for exams. And this man was a seeker. He was about my father's age, and he became truly my best friend thus far, a friend of a different interest, different degree of communication of all my schoolmates. With him, it was a joy to speak. And he had been part of the Theosophic Society until Krishnamurti came and dissolved it. You probably know the Krishnamurti story, how he was expected as a messiah by Theosophical Society, had been trained to be the world teacher, and he started his preaching against authorities, and particularly spiritual authority, and for finding one's own spirit independently from this dependence on the idea of gurus. And this friend who stayed with me was one of the few supporters that Krishnamurti had in the Theosophic Society. So he had a very alive mind, and he taught me the things I needed for school, but in a situation a bit like Rousseau's idyllic fantasy. He would take me every morning walking into the hills with a pick to show me the minerals, the stones, and he taught me botany about observing the plants and the trees, and he, in a moment of sitting on a stone, taught me French and so forth, but all was very spiced with what really interested him, which everything connected to the search. So he gave me the first spiritual books, Vivekananda books, and somebody called Ramacharaka. I don't know whether anybody...
Yeah, I do.
You know Ramacharaka is an American who wrote on yoga very well. So I was injected by him I caught the virus of this seeking. I think that without it I would have become very enthusiastic about matters of worldly ambition or intellectual learning and love. And all those things were present. And like every adolescent, I became enamored of science when I came to that in high school, or I already had come to it. And I fell in love with a couple of girls before I dared approach them. I was talking about the time when I was 11. But mostly I felt I was seeking something else. And I had no words for this something else except the word Om. Somebody had, in some conversation, this became the word for which I've started to use for the unnameable, which I couldn't explain. Something worth seeking that was not really worldly. And for a long time I was living room seeker, or an armchair seeker, or somebody who dreamt he was doing something about it. I didn't know what it was to walk on the way. I was still in the maze, not having come to the path properly. It took many years. And I had the good luck of being taken to another step in my search through two simultaneous influences. One of Gurdjieff, whom I didn't meet personally, but through his thick book, All and Everything, The Tales of Beelzebub, to his grandson. I don't know whether anybody has read this forerunner of science fiction, where Beelzebub has finished his mission on Earth and is returning to the center of the universe, and has fully grown his horns now, and he tells his grandson Hussein, the play of words there with the grandson of Muhammad, answers all the questions of Hussein, who's particularly interested in his grandfather's stories about the poor earthlings, these wretched beings who cannot put together their three brains. The book ends when the grandson says, "But isn't there anything that can be done for them?" And Beelzebub says, "Only if they could remember, but really remember all the time that they're going to die. That might wake them up." And a friend of my mother had brought this book from Paris, recommended it highly, and I started looking into it. I was finishing high school by then. I understood very little, but I understood enough to want very much to go on reading in spite of not understanding. And at the end of every page, I was a little bit in doubt whether I'd continue reading something I understood so little, or should I quit? But let me see, just a little more. Because there was always a carrot before. He was a master carrot manipulator. He put his reader always in the expectation of some great truth that will be understood on the following paragraph, or the following page, and when you finish the full chapter, on the following chapter. And I read and read and read, and after some time I knew that in spite of not understanding very much of what I was reading, I had built a relationship with Gurdjieff, that somehow he had become to me a kind of grandfather figure. There were some things I was getting that were not in the script. It were more in the attitude and the way of being and his manner of speech even. So I was very touched by Gurdjieff. And from Gurdjieff, of course, I got certain things were understandable. I don't know how many people here know of Gurdjieff, or a lot. Seekers have a great debt to Gurdjieff, I think, in the Western world. He came from this mysterious school that my teacher Ichaso came from, very inaccessible. And he created an institute in France called Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man. First in Turkey, then in France. And this idea of integration of the centers, the head, the heart, and the belly, let's say, coincided for me with another influence of somebody who had never read Gurdjieff. I lent him some Gurdjieff and he was not particularly impressed. But he was an enlightened being too, an artist who lived in Chile. His name was Totila Albert. He's still a prophet ignored by his own lands. I see him as a prophet who only one person recognized as a prophet. A prophet was a single disciple, which was I. And I would say he became my spiritual father. I can say it in retrospect after he died. He was never a teacher. He was like when I befriended Carlos Castaneda and he told me about the difference between a teacher and a benefactor. I could say Totila Albert was to me a benefactor. He passed on a blessing, but he was not somebody who took the role of a taskmaster or an instructor. He was an artist, and an artist who sang of the other shore and had a way of living that had some contagion to it. But Gurdjieff and Totila Albert have the same notion of becoming three brains. Only that in Totila Albert, the language was one of bringing together the inner three, father, mother, and child. What we call sometimes three brains, now that there's the studies, the evolutionary studies of the brain since MacLean, he spoke of these inner persons, more phenomenologically actually than anatomically. The psyche as an interplay of three persons, more or less connected with the intellectual part, with the emotional part, with the willful, the desiring, or the conative part, active, but not exactly that either. And I had great trouble understanding what's the father, what's the mother, what's the child. And when he died, he gave me his name, very informally. He said, "Goodbye, Totila." And I said, I thought it was a lapsus, because he had had a brain stroke some months before. And he says, no, now I go and you will be Totila. And I said, but I don't understand the things you say. You are one who has gone through death and rebirth. And to me, these are just ideas. I have no idea of cannot fathom the experience. It will come. You only need one thing, and that is suffering. It will come by itself. It will come when you're 37, he said. And when I was 37, I didn't realize at first I was 37. I lost my only son and rolled down a cliff in Big Sur. I was not with him. And about weeks later, I was weeping and weeping and weeping. And then one day I realized, I'm 37, just as he said. Pain has come to me. And immediately after that, Oscar Ichazo sent me to the Arica Desert in the north of Chile. I didn't know whether to become an apprentice or a disciple to Oscar Ichazo. Who knows Oscar Ichazo here? Quite a number of people. I didn't like him very much. And I trusted him very little. But I was fascinated by what his answers to my questions. Anything I asked, he answered with knowledge that was obviously not from books, but firsthand. And I meditated with him sometimes, and it was literally electrifying. There was something that he transmitted by presence. And I was very, very doubtful about becoming his student, because I had told myself before meeting him, I will only accept him as a teacher if my intuition is that that fits. I must feel that he is my teacher. And I never came to feel that with him. But the candy he gave me, spiritual candy and intellectual candy and knowledge candy, was enough to at least formulate the question, should I be your student? But the question was qualified. I had gone through Gestalt therapy. I had become a truthful person. I'd become courageous in saying things as in the world of the therapy of the 60s. We had all become courageous in the way we shared. I had divested myself from early vanity. Maybe I picked up different layers of vanity later from spiritual achievements, but at that time I was fairly innocent of it. And so I asked him, would you accept me as would you recommend I be your student in spite of my perceiving you as a liar and a manipulator? And my decision, the first part of my decision to accept was the way he smiled in response. He smiled as like thinking are you a liar, manipulator? Can I be your disciple if I perceive you as a liar? And he smiled and says, you've been disappointed before. It's reasonable you doubt me, but you will know from the fruit. And you won't have to wait very long to know, because I'm going to propose to you something that is very rare. It's a technique that came to my hands because of my role as a seed individual, somebody to transport the tradition. But it's not something that is normally offered to people who are young. Traditionally, it's only made available or known for the transmission of this knowledge to people who have come to their realization otherwise, through more conventional means. So that's how the retreat in the desert came. 40 days. It was suggestive. 40 days in the desert. With a promise of enlightenment. Today I would say that he fulfilled the promise, except that the enlightenment didn't last so long. It was enlightenment in the Christian sense of the word, via illuminativa, illumination. The early enlightenment, like in the Zen tradition, you have stories like Hakuin who have impressive experiences of Satori in the early days and then go through very hard times of this so-called Zen sickness. There's a phenomenon of expansion and then contraction. It's very well known in all the spiritual traditions. And when he visited me in the desert in the last day, he said, these experiences that you've had here and what you will take from here are something alone. In time you will lose it all and you'll have to recover it by yourself. And it was a source of trust for me in him that he knew what he was saying. I could verify in the coming years that this was exactly what happened. So when I was in my season in heaven, like some shamans have it, the season in heaven comes before the season in hell. We may think otherwise because the therapeutic process is like a purification that comes before, but that's not really this phase of hell in the spiritual sense, which is the dark night of the soul, that comes after illumination. So I had my expansion, my period of expanded consciousness, unusual abilities, inspiration, so especially inspiration. When I then started teaching, he had prepared me for teaching, even though in the end it would be too long to tell, but he took away the support, so I was on my own. It was like, thrust, do I teach or do I teach? He said I was ready to teach, and then he sends me away, and I had reasons to doubt, as if there was a cut in the umbilical cord, which also I could appreciate very much in retrospect. And he wanted me to be without a teacher. He had very intensely given a lot. So I'm supposed to talk about my work, and I have barely talked about my work, except that now I could insert as a parenthesis that by the time I met Ichazo, he had with him the original writing that became my first book. My first book is called The One Quest. And first it was published as a document of SRI, the Education Policy Research Center at SRI. And he had it, I don't know how he had it, and says, this is correct, perfect. An integrative statement. But now you're going to learn what you wrote. And you're going to really experience what you wrote. And this writing of this book, The One Quest, came from an experience of having gone through many teachings, and attempted my first synthesis. When I started working in Chile, before the experience of the desert that I have told you about, when I was in my Esalen days, and when I did Gestalt therapy workshops in Esalen, I started a group in Chile that was even mentioned in the Esalen catalog as Esalen in Chile. It was inspired in the Esalen idea but differed from it in that it was not up for people to choose this or that workshop, to go to bodywork activities or to go to meditation activities. There were a number of elements in a program, but the idea was that everybody goes through the whole program. I called it Institute for Human Development. It didn't persist after I left. I came to California. But much happened in the context of this. I was influenced by Orage, who created psychological exercises inspired in Gurdjieff. I did Gestalt therapy in those days. I taught meditation. I had been with Suzuki here in California. I created exercises. We were a way of bringing the meditative attitude into encounter, not just interpersonal communication practices, but kind of synthesis between the spiritual attitude and the relational. So Esalen was like prehistory of my work, and it was just before I wrote The One Quest. But then Esalen, when I was invited by Esalen, and I for the first time brought into my Esalen workshops meditation and Gestalt and psychological exercises, I had the great stimulus of having people from the Zen Center come. Now they had much more Zen experience than I had, but they were in search for the shamanic element. And I was very much a sorcerer's apprentice, a long way before the Arica Experience, a long way before. But I was in a shamanic path in the sense of being internally driven. It's as if I was following a distinct inspiration of where to go. I must make this shorter. The time I was in California teaching was not very long. It was about 3 years. I was helped and stimulated to quit by a teacher called E.J. Gold, who called me. I had never met him. In those days he was called Beast, like Aleister Crowley, the Beast. He invited me to Vancouver, where he had taken over one of the Gestalt centers. The people in Gestalt world had made him, saw him as a teacher, and he was doing very unusual things. And there I expected to meet him, but there was only a light blue visiting card in a wall, which read Avatar al-Washi, the wild one, with an address in Wilshire Boulevard, and it's a parenthesis which said, worlds created, maintained, and destroyed while you wait. And this was the closest I have met to Gurdjieff. But he additionally played Gurdjieff. He could mimic Gurdjieff, and he could mimic Gurdjieff's way of writing, his style. And it was a very interesting experience. It was, he presented a fake Sufi school that was fake. It was really real. A real thing hidden through the pretense of being fake. And when he produced some little books with illustrations and like for children, very difficult things to grasp about allowing oneself to be eaten by a higher entity. It's not things of common experience. but with very ugly drawings, like for a child that has not learned to draw. As if he made a point of creating a distance with this public, anybody who wants something polished, something eloquent, as if you have to jump a certain barrier to get his attention. So I had met him, but he called one day offering to come and see all my people. And all my people was, I had group 1 had 90 people, group 2 had 60 people. There were 4 levels of SAT in the days in Berkeley. How many can you see? All of them. Well, I only made it available for 2 groups, over 100 people, to have a private interview with him. And for 3 days he did that. He gave private interviews to each person, but some were exceedingly brief, and many were impactful. And the offer, E.J. Gold's offer, was to direct people to the next stage in the work. He said to each person something that made them look elsewhere and say, it's time to leave this school, this training. But I knew very well he was taking off my back something because it was right. And it didn't take much longer before I felt my inspiration was quite dry. My season in heaven had gone, and now I was back on earth, sober, and not much to keep people's attention vibrant. So I went through a period of becoming an ordinary human being again, and not channeling high inspiration, but with what I had learned from myself, what I learned from this bout of inspiration, I started doing workshops here and there in Europe to earn my livelihood. I did workshops on meditation, I did workshops on parental relationships, I did workshops on spontaneous movement, I did workshops related to music. I've had a number of specialties, and each was something. I became a specialist on the inner journey and the so-called tale of the hero, the symbolism connected to it. And this continued, but I was quite uninspired to the extent that I stopped keeping a journal. I had kept journals very early in life. It was part of my self-study, and now it was a kind of lethargy about laziness, about any kind of inner work. It's part of the stage of contraction, as it's called in Sufism, is after the expansion, after the via illuminativa. So I developed many of my specialties by doing a workshop in Holland on this, doing a workshop in Paris on that, doing a workshop in Germany on a third thing, little by little pieces of what was the SAT program. I polished further. And there was a time when I was invited to put all this together again, when somebody proposed I do a 3-year course that would be 1 month-long intensive per year, 3 consecutive month-long residential programs. And I decided to accept that. I didn't have the direct line to heaven. I didn't feel, I was amazed by the things I was saying, but people were very grateful. People were really interested. And I felt more useful than I had ever felt, because when I was speaking from the top of the holy mountain, I was sort of wrapped in my own greatness. I was absorbed in the mysterious inspiration and in the beauty of it. And now I was not impressed, but people were touched. It was useful. I began to have a sense that has even continuously increased. It has amazed me that how can it be more and more and more. I remember my wife used to say, to laugh at me, because how was it? The best ever. Every time I did some kind of work, the first SAT was divided in 3 modules originally, then 4 and 5. How was it? The best module of this kind I've ever done. And she was inclined to think I talked myself into it, but I'm convinced it was not. It was more like it's a growing, I'm a growing person still, like any vegetable grows and grows and grows till it begins to decline. And then I haven't felt that I started to decline yet. I fear it. Every time I spend some time in California, and I have to go to Mexico to start my season of traveling teachings. Will I be fluent? Will it work? Will the magic be there? I think there is a magical, but not the kind of magic that opened my lips without my knowing what I was going to say. It's more a sense that I have people who are helping me in a less visible way. I hadn't thought about it until a certain time in my life when I met a medium with a great experience in that. And he said, "You think it's you who do the work. No, you have friends on the other side who are helping a lot." And so it's been like that. I feel as I have the extra blessings behind me. Maybe I'm more and more permeable to them. I've gotten blessings from different teachings, different lineages, the Chasos, the Tibetan, Totila Alberts, those 3 principally. And as if they have continued to support what I do, to give a life to what I do, but the work has evolved too. I could never say I invented what I do. I present it as a program. It is a program, it's a curriculum. But it's more, there are certain things that cannot be invented. It's like pebbles in a river. They get rounded in a special way. Because of, you can be there, you can acompañar, how do you say? Accompany. You can accompany certain processes by being there, make certain choice. For instance, one of the ingredients in my early evolution was the latihan. Do you know the Indonesian practice was known as subud when it came to San Francisco in the 60s, I think. Yes, 60s I heard about it. It's in Indonesian. The practice is surrendering to the will of God. And when men and women meet separately, and the only rule is no talking and no contact. It's an individual experience. But you surrender to whatever comes in the presence of others. And I caught that. I caught that from in Chile. It's a very striking phenomenon. What I thought it was a kind of hysterical phenomenon when I was a young psychiatrist, and I met people who were part of this group. And the first time I experienced it, I was feeling very dry. I was feeling I could not feel. And I was intensely wanting to feel. And a good friend was sitting next to me, and I was telling her, and she had been with me in one of Fritz Perl's groups. And she says, intensify that. Intensify that. And it's as if the concentration on my hands, because, intensify the pressure in your hand, probably, she said. It was as if I saw a little bit the muscles in my hand as something beautiful. And my hand started to move as if by itself. And of course, I had to follow it because it was so awesome that my hand could move. It's, some of you may have had experiences of possession. Some artists have it, that a kind of inspiration which is really listening to the poetry. Some painters, like Fritz Perls, like to teach painting, and it started from there, being able to feel where the brush wants to go by itself. It can be cultivated to some extent, and it's the essence of African religion. It's very widespread in South America, in Colombia, in Brazil. You invite entities, the difference, like in the Vedic gods or the Greek gods, they're all the pantheons are more or less equivalent in the end. There's an entity which is strength, the other is artistic, and the other has to do with justice and so forth. I have never felt this, like as if a string was pulling me from not only from very far, but from a divine realm, not from here. I was very taken with that, and I started to cultivate it, to invite it. So when I started SAT, this was, Marlis, you may remember that. She was in SAT in those days. And for a long time, I had ceased to include this in the programs because I didn't know anybody who was connected enough to teach it. I couldn't do anything all the time. Until I found in Italy somebody who was trained in what's called authentic movement. Does anybody know about authentic movement? It's not so well known. It was born in the sphere of dancing. It was, and it was born in a Jungian intellectual context. But essentially it's the same thing, yield to what wants to happen. I once did a workshop together with Dhiravamsa, maybe some of you know the name of Dhiravamsa, a meditation teacher who came from England and now is living in Spain. And I wanted to do it, we both did half the day in the residential workshop in New York. And I wanted to do something that would interest him. It would be different from Buddhism. And it was from his land, he was Indonesian. And then he started doing that, and together with meditation. And instead of saying surrender to the will of God, he would say surrender to the energy. And it worked fine too. This idea of surrendering to something that happens by itself, that's not you doing it. So that came to be an important part. And there were people who, I had several theater directors come through my programs and invited them to integrate what they knew from theater with the enneatypes and with Gestalt therapy, elements of what they had learned with me. And they did excellent jobs. So by accretion, what might have seemed to be just a collage of different things. I remember when I came to Spain, somebody at a bookstore recognized me because of my books. And he says, and what do you do? What are you doing in Spain? And I said, well, I combine meditation and Gestalt therapy, enumerated 3 or 4 things, Sufi tales, a little of everything. And I went along with him, a little of everything. But the truth was that there was a deeper structure to this ensemble. I would say that the inner curriculum, beyond the different names of the different things that are done, is concerned with 3 forms of love and 3 aspects of self-knowledge. Everybody needs to develop compassion. That's the number 1 thing in the curriculum. Some people call it a school for love, as if it were not also a school for self-knowledge, and as if love could be liberated without using self-knowledge. Actually, we are loving already, but we're so entrapped in our selfishness and in our violence that we need to look at ourselves to be able to leave part of ourselves behind. So there's this aspect of people become more compassionate. I was very influenced in this by somebody who lived in Oakland, and Cynthia knew him very well. His name was Bob Hoffman. How many know about Bob Hoffman? Not many. When I knew him, he made shirts. He was a tailor. And when his mother died, he was desperate, and he was trying to find somebody who could tell him, does she live on? And can I communicate with her? He couldn't let go of this wish. And in a certain church in Oakland that I came to know later, but no longer exists now, it was called Church of the Metaphysical Light. There was a lady who answered the questions of those in attendance, and by asking them to write questions on a piece of paper and put them in a hat. So she would take questions from a hat. And when it was the turn of who became one of my best friends, but he no longer lives. When it was his turn, the woman took the piece of paper, but didn't open it. Just talked to him, and talked to him about things that only his mother and he knew, as if to prove, it's your mother, all right, I'm contacting. And he was so impressed that he kept coming to that church and that person, who was naturally a medium. And he developed a mediumistic ability, or discovered it, maybe he had it already. And to make a long story short, he contacted, through his new acquired ability, contacted somebody he had known who was the family doctor of his wife. Somebody he had known as the doctor of his wife, Dr. Fisher. And because Siegfried Fischer said such extraordinary things, and because it changed my friend's life, doing a kind of therapy from above, as in shamanism. Many shamans are changed through the influence of dead shamans. I came to think maybe he's a metaphor. Fisher, could it be the great fisherman? Could it be Dr. Fisher, S.F. Siegfried Fisher, Sigmund Freud? He's said to be of Vienna also, which made it suspicious, S.F. And the process that Fisher took Bob Hoffman through was very convincingly successful in turning his inner life around. And I knew I came to him, even though I was in the aftermath of the Arica Experience. I was very full. I was not looking for something, but it's as if I have always pursued like a kind of spiritual hobby, anything related to threefoldness and Trinity. I was told he works with father, mother, and child. Is this really in a relationship? So I wanted to know what this was about. And I had 8 sessions with him. It was like the 6 hours with Oscar Ichazo in the course of that year where I got the perception of the types. It was very mysterious how I got it, but that's another long story. I suspect I may be getting boring at this point. What do I have to say that I haven't said?
Three forms of love and three forms of self-knowledge. Your current program.
So I sometimes ask people what is love, and it's obvious that nobody can put it into words, but it's like God. You cannot say anything about God. So some people say God is love. But you can say that love comes in certain qualities or dimensions of love. Just like to define a point in space, you need 3 dimensions. Or in the world of color, to define color, we have 3 color receptors in the eye. Or in the chemistry of color, all colors can be made out of 3. So in that sense, I say that there are 3 dimensions of love. One, the earliest, most primitive, if you like, most biological, in a sense, erotic love. But erotic love is not just sexual love, it's not genital love. Erotic love is what binds mother to child. It's a touchy-feely love. It's what we seek when we are in love with someone. We seek the original object, the great satisfaction. We're so hurt when we have love problems because it goes back to that original bond. So erotic love in the romantic sense and not only in the physical sense. But even erotic love doesn't function well if it doesn't go together with some measure of appreciation. And that's a different dimension of love. You must respect the other even to have full orgasms. You must be in love is not just something that can be explained mechanically. You need to have a sense of the mystery of the other, to make the other as mysterious as the self. So there's a kind of love that has to do with friendship more than with eros. When we are attracted by somebody as a friend, we detect certain values, and we want those values. Friendship has always an element of apprenticeship. There's somebody who is a little more advanced, and there's a learner, a little bit like the Greek model. It was sexualized in the Greek culture, but there's an element of validity that philia, as Aristotle calls this love, has to do with a dimension of love completely different from eros and different also from compassion. And compassion or empathy is very different from the other two. In compassion, it's as if we orient our love downwards to creatures, to individual people, to the needy. In admiration or in philia, it's more love towards the heavenly. So I see these two as the two wings with which we fly. Heavenly love or earthly love. Nietzsche used to say that women love men and men love God. Very sad situation. There's a little bit that tendency of one is more masculine and the other is more feminine. Compassion just gets more linked to mothering. So eros and philia and how's compassion called? Agape. So that's part of what I try to bring about in this curriculum, but it cannot be done without dealing with the ego, cannot deal with self-awareness. And I think self-awareness needs to start in awareness of the ongoing experience. If we don't have contact in the present, we can't conclude about ourselves anything more complex. As Gurdjieff used to say, you have to take many pictures of yourself before you see the gestalt between the different pictures, you see the configuration. So there's a kind of self-knowledge in the moment, knowledge that is involved in understanding one's life, or understanding one's relationships, or understanding one's personality. And then there's what you might call the metaphysical self-knowledge, self-knowledge in the deeper sense of who am I really, who am I beyond my character, beyond my roles, who am I beyond my self-images. So that's the essential question of all esoteric traditions or spiritual. Yeah, that's something that's only answered through meditation, through refining the mind until the mind can find out directly through a means of perception different from the intellect. So, mostly what I have told you about is that my work became very successful. I was very pleased not only about being able to do something useful, but it was like kind of antidote to a tendency I always had since childhood to feel I'm not giving enough. When somebody has remarked that if anybody walks out, now it doesn't happen any longer, but if anybody walked out from a talk, my tendency was always automatically, what did I say wrong? What did I do wrong? Somebody in the transpersonal, we'll call it what? TAP, how do you call it? The transactional, TA, transactional analysis did my what do you call the undershirt?
Underdog?
No, the undershirt. T-shirt. My T-shirt said, "What's wrong with me?" We carry, even when we have come to some evolution, there's lingering voices like phantoms that come when we're tired, when we sleep, and so forth. So this voice in me was satisfied. I started to feel like Santa Claus. And people have been telling me I look like Santa Claus. I don't think it's just my beard. There's something. I'm becoming a kind person. I was not very much in touch when I was young. And but as I got into my 60s, I think, I started to be touched for the first time in life by social issues. I think I cut off, maybe it's normal to feel it when we are young, but I remember distinctly in my childhood to feel desperate about seeing a beggar. The only thing I could do was give everything I had, and it wouldn't change his life. And as a child, I didn't have anything anyhow. So when I knew of hunger in Africa, at some point I decided I need to concentrate on what I know to do and say this is enough. I had read about Pavlov being criticized because he was not attending the meetings of the Communist Party, and he made a case for being in his laboratory was the best thing he could do for society, continuing the study of his dogs, and he was allowed to do that. He was famous enough, or he had credibility to make that choice. So I had done that long ago in my life. I had opted for impotence, for an impotent outlook. That can't be helped. What can an individual do? And that started to change, and the ideas of my earlier teacher friend, Sotila Albert, I started to understand them differently through the difference in the time had elapsed. He spoke, I think he was the first person in history to talk about patriarchy as a problem. He was the first who indict patriarchy. When I met him for the first time, my first conversation with him, I was in the last year of high school, and I expounded some optimistic ideas of the progress of consciousness. And he said, I'd like to think like you. Oh, you don't think? I think, and this was in the 40s, I think the world is very crazy. I think it is possible we may self-destruct. And I knew when he said that he knew what he was talking about. And I became his disciple, even though he didn't want that kind of relationship. He related to me always as a friend, in spite of a difference in age, that he could have been my grandfather. I started to milk him, tried to make his understanding mine. So he was somebody who wanted to leave an imprint in the world. He wanted to wake people up to patriarchy and to the social dysfunction of unenlightened consciousness. He didn't use that vocabulary. And I started to get it a lot later, and I started to write my political books like Healing Civilization and Patriarchal Ego. The last one is not in English yet. The Revolution We Expected is the title in Spanish, but I think I may call it in English, The Revolution We Expected and Feared. A revolution which I claim is happening, but not because we are doing it, but because it's happening by itself. That we're coming to a collective death of one way of being and the birth of something new. So at that time of my life, I became an activist. I became somebody primarily interested in changing society. And even though I was doing work with groups, the perspective was different. The best explanation I know for this change in shift in perspective was a story about somebody who was cutting stone, and somebody says, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm just working on the stone, cutting the stone into pieces." And the questioner walks a little bit further, and there's another one doing the same thing and says, and what are you doing? Oh, I'm helping to build this cathedral. Helping to build a cathedral. So it was different to work on people with this other layer of intention, feeling that this is helping somebody beyond the people I have present. And then I wanted to shift from having so many therapists in my groups, and I wanted to give priority to teachers, because everybody goes through schools. Teachers have a great opportunity to pass on humanness. And the foundation was created in Spain for this, and I have many years now teaching teachers. But not only that, but trying to kindle a revolutionary movement among teachers. And I have accomplished it in Spain. It's quite strong now. And it's happening a little bit slower in Italy, but I'm acting in other countries too, because governments will not do it. The transnational world is only interested in business and in the status quo. It has to be teachers who pressure governments. So that's what my work is now, carrying on when I would have probably stopped working if it were not because I feel my work has this added dimension. And now that I've been invited to once more do a group here, which I hope I have enough life to follow up on for a couple of years, because now I'm 81. If I do this, it has the added meaning that I feel it may happen here as in Spain, that the contagion and the enthusiasm of those participating may interest in the end those who have connection with the teaching system and interest teachers to begin to know what this is about. I think it's a great tragedy that I think we have the world we have because we don't have another education. But the education we have is not for human development, but for teaching, for instruction, and for the transmission of undesirable attitudes like conformity and self-distraction and so forth. So I think I've said enough. If there were some time or energy left, I prefer to answer questions. Oh.
If anybody's going to speak, we'll make the microphone on if you wouldn't mind, because we're recording this. We will make it.
Given that we're growing old together, what's your concept of dying well?
I don't have much experience, or I don't remember of previous possible deaths. But I know that I would not have died well 10 years ago. In spite of many outer achievements, I wouldn't have felt the satisfaction of something like a mission accomplished. Even if I don't do more, I feel I have left a trace, I've done something that remains. Even I even have an idea that it will be seen more clearly after I'm gone. But also, I think being at a stage in one's journey where you can afford to die without the sense, oh, I have not come to fruition. It's not just external fruits, but internal fruits. I today have a taste of fruition. I don't say I've come to the end of my spiritual development, but I feel, and I've been told by the authorities, that I've come to fruition, to the maturation of the path where in some sense it doesn't matter if you have come to the very end or not. I don't have very definite ideologies, but I understand the feeling. There's the concept in Buddhism that at a certain stage, even in the early Buddhism, there's the idea that you can complete your work if you come to the Amitabha paradise, where you can continue maturing there without having to come back here. It makes sense as an expression of a way of feeling. So I don't know that there's anything that we can do about dying. Well, it's recommended to be conscious. Conscious death. Probably right, but I cannot say. I remember Yogi Chen, he was a great master who lived anonymously in Berkeley. I met him the day he arrived in Berkeley. Yogi Chen, did anybody know about Yogi Chen? He has many booklets on Tibetan Buddhism, very precious teachings. He once told me, Alan Watts died like a pig. He was unconscious. What a pity. Maybe. The Tibetans tend to know a lot about these things. They seem to be able to visit the deceased. Some of them can.
How do you separate, the fact that someone is egotistic, they want to accomplish something, from the fact that the ego is the enemy, like I've told?
I think there are stages. I think that, for instance, if I translate into my experience, there was a time when I was ambitious in the sense of wanting to be important. When I was a schoolboy, I got good marks. I remember a desire, I want to help humanity. There was a notion of being a scientist, being of help, and it moved me to tears. But today, looking back, I would say there was a sense of emptiness behind that, wanting to be somebody, to forget being nobody. Then there was a stage of great surrender, of something like a willingness to disappear as a person for the sake of that higher consciousness I'm looking for, where it was not just transient experiences of ego dissolution, but as if my life was naturally more virtuous in those years, as if it was not fighting against the ego. But I think there comes a stage when the ego comes back, like you're not so pure anymore or so virtuous anymore. What Jung described as the reintegration of his shadow, I think it takes place in a high level of spiritual development too. You become a little bit more worldly, a little blasphemous too. I did become blasphemous.
Because before you said that you wanted to be, you've accomplished enough. So that is somewhat you know, to satisfy the ego. So it's, you know.
My ego was satisfied, yes, but then I was seized by something like a mission, like a sense. It is more an enthusiasm. I have an energy that is striking. Last year I wrote 3 books in my couple months here. People have difficulty following my energy. When I have people who help me, I get them tired. It reminds me of the Gurdjieff phenomenon. I remember Gurdjieff saying, if I wanted to know something and I would like to have some research done, why some people have an extraordinary energy. And he was one of them. It's like when you are in tune with something that is wanted from above, so to say, you are given that energy. You're pulled into it. It's been a practice for me to deal with my tiredness. It's not that I don't get tired. I get very tired when walking nowadays, more than a block. I get tired with reading. And so I'm very familiar nowadays with physical pain or physical discomfort, but there is a joy of being that cuts across it. It's a completely different level than the level of pleasure. It's an inner satisfaction that I think I've learned to cultivate, but it could not be cultivated as a separate thing if it were not a possibility of contacting a deeper part of myself. It looks like, is it time for dinner?
So maybe we can, unless there is any burning question, maybe we can close it here. And so thank you so much, Claudio, for coming here to see us tonight. And thank you so much. Thank you all of you to be here, and as mentioned, Karina Bertolotto is here, Cynthia, they are organizing the SAT program with Claudio here in California, so we'll be here for at least 15 minutes before we take off for dinner, for 10 minutes, so if you have questions, there's information also on the table, and thank you all of you also for being here tonight. Thank you.